3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Alright, welcome to Roots of Reality. My name is Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of political polarization. So since the beginning of human civilization, societal disagreements have caused a tremendous amount of chaos, leading to not only poor functioning societies, but also needless bloodshed through violent crimes, coup attempts, revolutions, and civil wars. All of which is due to the inability for people to compromise. For example, some of the most common historical causes of political polarization in society include things like economic inequality. This was a major issue in ancient Rome about 2,000 years ago when a man named Catiline had just lost an election to become a Roman consul, which was one of the highest government positions in the Roman Republic. In turn, he decided to try to overthrow the government by promising the poor that he would help them if they helped him. However, Catiline's plan was later found out before he could act on it, and he was then put to death. Another cause of political polarization includes religious tension. For instance, in 744, the Umayyad Caliphate was overthrown because it was considered to be not Muslim enough. Interestingly, these types of issues regarding who is a good Muslim continue to pop up in the Muslim world today, with things like the divide between Sunnis and Shiites, which are essentially different denominations of Islam, kind of like how you have in Christianity Protestants and Catholics. Also, another common cause of polarization stems from the question of who should be the leader of a nation and how powerful that leader should be. This became a problem all across Europe in 1848, where various revolutions occurred against different European monarchies in the hopes of creating more democratic governments. However, these revolutions were all defeated, and this problem really does continue to occur regularly around the world. And we must remember, most places in the world are not free, therefore they are, totally controlled by dictators who will not tolerate any sort of criticism. So when you hear about protests in non-democratic countries, usually it is about this issue. Lastly, various forms of discrimination also play a major role in the history of polarization. For example, in 1849, Canada's Parliament building got burned to the ground due to this ethnic tension between British Canadians and French Canadians. In fact, even today, despite how people tend to group European ethnicities together as just, being white or something like that, and you especially see this in the U.S., since the U.S. has such a mixed population and people just want to have very general groups for all these different ethnicities. However, around the world, these subtle differences, even if your skin color is somewhat similar, these ethnic differences do still matter in many places, even in some places in Europe. And today we see these ethnic divides still occur in nations that are based on a particular ethnicity. And so when some of these nations, for example, in the European Union, may get immigrants, you can still have this sort of anti-immigration sentiment occur where the native population feels threatened if there's too much immigration from other ethnicities around the world. Or another example comes from recent issues that have popped up in Eastern Europe regarding people who are not heterosexuals. So if you identify as something that is not straight, you could still face lots of discrimination in Eastern Europe, which has been passing laws recently against those who are not heterosexuals. So, and of course, in other places like Africa or in parts of Asia or South America or even Mexico, this can also still be a really big problem. In fact, it can even be illegal in some countries. Therefore, all of these factors can cause political polarization to a certain extent in different nations today. But if your nation is not a democracy, obviously political polarization may be a little bit different because nations run by dictators usually possess a stronger ability to silence those that want to object to how the government is doing things. Therefore, you might see massive protests occur, but these protests often don't lead to any actual change and just end up resulting with mass arrests. And ultimately, this is just because in dictatorships, political polarization will usually go away once a dictator shows that they are in complete control. And having the backing of the military is key here, because if a dictator loses support of the military and the protests can no longer be contained, or even the resistance to a dictator has some sort of military support, it could lead to a civil war, or it could lead to a dictator being overthrown. And obviously, having a civil war occur is the worst case scenario, and it unfortunately is not uncommon that after a civil war you may have one dictator just replaced by another. And you had lots of people that just risked their lives and died for a cause that really didn't change much. However, in democracies, the situation is quite a bit more complex because there is this freedom to object against the government. Thus, it can be easier for democracies to have political polarization since there are so many people who have a voice from different political backgrounds. But at the same time, democracy can allow for more chances to settle disputes and differences, because if enough people have faith in that democratic system of change, then they feel it's not worth resorting to violence like a civil war or assassination attempts to solve problems, but rather it's just a matter of passing new laws and getting the public officials that you want elected into office so they can help create new laws to make the nation better in the way that you see fit. In turn, perhaps one of the best nations to discuss regarding political polarization in the modern world today is the United States of America, which is a country that is well known for its long democratic tradition, but it's also a country that's had many different phases where political polarization has been a major problem. So the United States is not a country that is not used to such political polarization, but today in the modern world, it's probably one of the most polarized. And so when tackling sort of why the United States is so polarized today, we have to understand the basic structure of this country, which is built around two major political parties which battle each other for power by tending to try and make each other look as bad as possible in the world today in order to try to improve their chances of getting their particular candidates elected. And then you have things like unlimited financial donations from lobbyists to candidates, which allow for big corporations to have lots of influence on politicians, trying to get them to vote for particular bills that help their companies, and in turn, they'll get lots of campaign donations to help keep them elected in power. You also have gerrymandering, which is a political strategy that probably should not be allowed, where politically biased leaders in each state who are in power can manipulate the boundaries of an area in a particular state in order to try to increase their chances of getting people from their political party elected. For example, let's say if I was a politician who is leading the state legislature in a particular state, and it's been 10 years, and so now I get to rewrite the different districts of my state. And so I'm going to try to find a way to get as much power as possible to help my political party, since I'm in charge of a process called redistricting. So then I would look at the map of all the different political districts in my state and look at the demographics of how people in these areas have voted historically and how they're likely to vote today. And then I would change these districts and their locations to ensure that I have the largest advantage as possible. Additionally, there is another way people try and win elections, which is to manipulate the rules of how elections are conducted. For example, whether it is easier or harder to vote in a state, since states make up their own voting and election rules to a certain extent, and how a candidate gets elected is based on a voting system with flaws as well, of course. For example, how the two political parties choose their candidates to represent their party in an election against the other party is by whoever wins the highest percentage of the vote, which initially it sounds fine. However, if you have 5 candidates and one is a total lunatic, and that lunatic has a very loyal following, even if everyone else hates that person, they could still get elected, because if the other 4 political candidates split the vote, then that lunatic wins because they have a loyal following, even if they are hated by everyone else. So all that lunatic needs is just a loyal following that is going to represent a higher percentage of the vote than the other candidates who are splitting the vote. And another problem comes from just the way what's called the Electoral College in the United States is designed, where if you live in a state that is 51% for one particular presidential candidate and 49% of that same state is for the other, then the person who gets 51% of the vote will win all of the Electoral College points for that state. And so even if a state seems very divided, it's winner takes all in many states except for a few like Nebraska and Maine. Which then makes us think, given the importance of elections and how much they mean for how a country develops in the future, it should probably be as thoughtful and as complex as possible to ensure that the best candidates possible are being elected. And so perhaps, a system where points are distributed based on the percentage of votes you get instead of a winner-takes-all format may be the way to go. But this is something that is actually politically polarizing as well in the U.S., where people debate this a lot. Some want to just abolish the Electoral College, others want to reform it, others just want to keep the system as it is. And often it just kind of depends on, which political party wins, since, if your political party wins using that particular system, you're not going to probably criticize it as much as if your candidate lost. Now, this is not to say other nations don't have flaws with their governments, because every nation has actually plenty of flaws. You can list flaws all day, no matter, what country a person's living in. And so, in turn, there is room for politicians who lack thoughtful ideas and solutions to complex problems to get elected. And then you get these increasingly loud and polarizing people in government that don't actually want to make compromises, but would rather just shove down your throat their politically biased beliefs. And then, of course, there are some American citizens who become supporters of these politicians and their ideas, who start to become very dedicated followers of more radical political candidates by becoming emotionally attached to a politician as if they are their, favorite actor or favorite music group. And they just start to blindly support anything that they do, and they start to seek out these news organizations and these websites that obviously favor their favorite political candidate. And that's another dangerous thing about politics, is the fact that a lot of people like to develop some type of strong worship almost of a political candidate that they really like, and they struggle to criticize that person once they become emotionally attached. And then this just leads to lots of politically biased ideas getting promoted by politicians based mostly on either unproven political theories or just misinformation rather than objective evidence. And because their followers are so dedicated, they will pretty much just believe anything these politicians say as if it's the word of God. So, as a result, here in the United States today, in terms of political debates causing polarization, which also tend to spread a bit to other parts of the world like Europe, the following topics I'm about to go over represent some of the major controversial debates happening right now. For example, just starting off, some have argued for an idea called critical race theory. And this is a concept that basically states that the United States government and its laws are currently almost hopelessly racist and work only to hurt individuals who are not of European ancestry. And so this obviously has become incredibly polarizing. And the thing is, these conversations about topics that are brought up, they don't have to become, even if someone totally disagrees with one or completely supports a topic like this, they really don't have to be as much of a political lightning rod as they become. Because, on one hand, obviously you can say it is great that people want to eliminate, all racism from society. Everyone should want that. And people today currently are clearly really trying to work hard to ensure that racism is not an issue, which is why they might promote, different ideologies to try to fix these problems. And historically, of course, the U.S. has had a long history of racism. That's just a fact, from slavery to Jim Crow, segregation, which is why you had the Civil Rights Movement. And so it's not illogical that theories trying to understand how the United States can deal with that past come about. That's not all that surprising. And this is why this theory is being promoted in the first place. But with that being said, though, this is obviously a really big claim to make that would require quite a bit of evidence to prove 100% factual, which is why it is considered to be a theory in the first place. But now, one aspect of critical race theory, which is 100% proven, is the idea of race in itself, which doesn't exist, as their theory points out, since race is obviously an invented identity, which is why it is best to not analyze everything based on race in the first place. So hopefully people will work together more in society to have more thoughtful discussions about such topics instead of wanting to sort of destroy each other over them. Though it is also interesting to point out that current polling suggests that most Americans do not support critical race theory. And so it'll be interesting to see how these debates unravel further in the public sphere. Another divisive topic in the U.S. is a claim by some that the 2020 election was fraudulent, which there is currently no evidence for. Obviously, it's a really easy claim to make, to say an election is fraudulent when you're disappointed with the result. However, the results are not changing. The Supreme Court has already ruled. So at this point, if you're still concerned about election fraud, you're kind of just beating a dead horse because it's not going to change, whether you like it or not. And currently, polling also suggests most Americans agree that it was not a fraudulent election. Next, there is the claim among some that all people of European ancestry are racist. Quite a polarizing claim to make, because you're taking one particular group of people and you're alienating them and kind of putting almost markings on them as, bad people. And of course, historically, this is just a myth, considering racism is not unique to any particular ethnic group. And still around the world today, you have all ethnicities that have, at one point or another, or still to a certain extent, have individuals who believe that their ethnic identity is superior. But luckily, in the U.S., most Americans reject this idea based on polling. Then there is the claim by some that all Americans on one side of the political spectrum are all socialists. And this is another really fiery claim made that does not have much evidence to support. Though socialist movement in the U.S. appears to be growing lately, definitely not all Americans on a certain political party are socialists. And polling suggests that most Americans reject socialism currently. Then there is another claim by some that capitalism is evil and socialism is a much better alternative. This is another interesting discussion that has occurred, but when you think objectively about socialism just as a political idea, the idea behind it is to create greater equality. So it's not like people who are socialists or something that they are trying to ruin society or something like that. They have an honorable goal in mind. They want to make things better, as I think everyone, regardless of their political views, want. Everyone who has a political ideology they truly think, deep down, their heart is in this. They think that this ideology will make the world a better place. And you can't fault them for that. I think we all want the world to be a better place. Now, historically, obviously, when talking about socialism, there really hasn't been a truly successful socialist nation. And also, based on polling, it suggests that most Americans today remain pretty skeptical or just flat out reject socialism as a political philosophy. We also have the claim by some that if you are not part of their political party, you are anti-American. And this is not a very scientific analysis, given a large part of patriotism is about wanting to make your nation better. Thus, criticizing your nation in itself really is patriotic if your intent is to actually improve it. Now, you probably shouldn't be just blindly saying, oh, this is the worst place ever, and it sucks, and everything sucks, and everywhere else is better, because that's clearly not objective. That just sounds like someone who's really pissed off and is just emotionally venting. That's not very helpful. But if you're critiquing your nation because you want it to be better, because you just want it to be a better place, as simple as that, that is patriotic, and people shouldn't get upset with people complaining. In fact, I think one of the things that's interesting from my experience observing Americans is that it seems like everyone wants to complain about something in the U.S. regarding the government. And so it seems like complaining about your government in the U.S. is kind of like a rite of passage. That's kind of the American thing to do, to have some problem with the government, something that they should be doing that they're not. Next, there is a claim by some that the police should be abolished or defunded due to police brutality, specifically due to the deaths of Americans in the past few years. And for this issue, there are, of course, plenty of valid concerns regarding police brutality, given the incidents that have occurred in recent years. You should never want to see police killing people. However, of course, if you just watch the news, you would think that millions of Americans are getting killed every day by police, given how much it gets promoted. And that makes us also have to keep in mind, okay, well, why does the media want to show things that happen that are politically polarizing? Because at the end of the day, media companies, they make money off of getting you to watch their channel. And so it's not really shocking that they're going to be promoting every little incident, nonstop for 24 or 48 hours, just because they know that there are people that will get super, upset about that. Everyone should be upset by those things happening. But we also keep in mind, okay, why is it being promoted so much? And, how often is this really happening? That's where another important point comes in, because statistically, the chance of being killed by police in the U.S. are still pretty low. For example, in 2019, unarmed Americans of African ancestry and European ancestry combined together here, only 39 unarmed people were killed by police. Meanwhile, in 2019, 48 police officers of all different races were killed by criminals. And additionally, in 2019, you have thousands and thousands of people getting killed by crime in the United States, which is a far much greater danger than the police killing someone. For example, you had, when it comes to Americans of European ancestry, you had 5,787 European Americans killed. When it comes to Americans of African ancestry, you had 7,484 Americans killed by crime. And when you include Americans who are Hispanic or Latino, you have 2,193 killed. In total, you have 13,927 Americans that are murdered in 2019, which is obviously way more than anyone killed by police. In turn, things clearly need to improve with policing to ensure the number of Americans killed by police drops to zero, because obviously that's the ideal number, is to have no one getting killed by police who are unarmed, that don't deserve to be shot. They're not attacking a police officer or something like that. But also, crime needs to be taken more seriously and be addressed in the U.S. as well, because it kills way more Americans. It also increases the chance of people getting killed by police, because it's constantly bringing police into communities with crime. And lastly, when it just comes to the concept of abolishing or defunding the police, there really isn't any evidence to suggest that that will get less people killed. And also, it's not a popular idea at all. If you're a politician and you're running on a platform of abolishing or defunding police, polling suggests that most people do not like this idea, And so it'd almost be political suicide to run a campaign based on the concept of it. Also, one more thing about crime in the US, because I think that you definitely have gotten a little bit of polarization when it comes to talking about crime, because on the political spectrum, there's obviously a divide. One wants to just talk about police killings, which is, totally understandable, and the other side wants to talk about crime, which is totally understandable as well. The point being, though, when it comes to murder in the US in general, we have to, people really need to start taking just murder in the US more seriously, because it is ridiculous for a nation that is considered to be one of the wealthier nations in the world to have so many young, talented people getting killed due to gun violence in the US all the time, every day. It's one of the biggest travesties of the 21st century in the US. Just think about all the people that could help make this world a better place, but are instead killed, whether it's just walking through their neighborhood or killed in a school shooting. Honestly, this is something that both political parties really should be embarrassed about, because they're not doing enough to help make this a safer place to live. And finally, I have just 3 more examples for you. I know I've been going through this list, so just bear with me. The next example is regarding the non-heterosexual community, so people that are gay, lesbian, trans, queer, and everyone else who's a part of that community. And this is another topic that has become really polarizing, which is also really tough to see, because, honestly, when you're thinking about this community of people who are, struggling to go through their lives and get accepted necessarily by everyone, the last thing you want is extra controversy that can sort of put unnecessary attention on these people that are really just trying to make sense of their lives and how to function in society, and sort of balance and navigate all the polarization that's going on. And so it's been really unfortunate to see, some people in American society trying to discriminate against people of this community, trying to say, like, oh, you can't buy a cake from my store, or you can't be a part of my church. And, everyone's obviously entitled to their religious beliefs. But at the end of the day, of course, I think it's really comes down to the question: we either believe in an all-accepting, merciful God, or you believe in a vindictive one that seems to be kind of insecure about how other people live their lives, even if they're not hurting anyone. And I imagine all of us would prefer to have a all-loving God that's, really accepting. If no one's hurting anyone, I don't know why anyone would really care. With that being said, there are obviously lots of interesting debates being had that have gotten really fiery and really kind of aggressive regarding, transgender athletes in sports, or what age should people be allowed to transition to the opposite sex, and to what extent can modern science at the moment successfully help someone transition to the opposite sex. And this is clearly a relatively new field for science to tackle, so it's not unusual for there to be more questions than answers right now on these topics. But because society has become so fanatical about attacking each other when it comes to questions of just trying to understand the subject, I think it's really not that beneficial for the community, for people especially who are maybe thinking about going through transition, because at the end of the day, the goal should be to help these people as much as possible. And you only do that by letting the people who are actually experts on the science behind what's going on sort of guide the way. And so there's a lot of political tension about it, but politicians really aren't the best people to be talking about this subject. It should really be the scientists who can help have discussions to help people go through what they need to go through. And it's unfortunate, I think, for people who are especially on the fence about what to make of the situation, when political voices are kind of dominating the conversation instead of the scientific ones, the people that dedicate their lives to understanding the complexities of people, because those are the people that are really going to make the biggest difference. And I think that it'd probably be better if people just let those people, like I said, lead the way. Another polarizing topic is the question about whether there should be gun control in the United States. Some fear that if you take away guns, the government will oppress us all, and therefore there are some people that are totally against any type of gun control. However, there's currently no evidence that if you have any gun control, it's going to lead to a complete abolition of guns. And based on polling, it's suggested that most Americans would like guns to be restricted more to prevent criminals from getting access to these. So, finally, the last topic of political polarization that I'll mention is that there are accusations by some that if you are accused of being discriminatory for some sort of inappropriate behavior, that you are automatically guilty. And this has become kind of a bizarre trend because in reality, these accusations should be taken incredibly seriously by all sides of the political spectrum. There should never be space for discrimination or anyone acting inappropriately. However, it seems like society has kind of let this sort of mob rule trial system take over in recent years just via the internet. And this is kind of strange, especially when you think about from a historical perspective, because it's really not what democracies are designed to do. We're not living in the age of the Salem witch trials where being accused of being a witch automatically makes you a witch. Instead, you are innocent until proven guilty, which it appears more people need to remember because that is how the justice system works. This is not to say the justice system is perfect, and of course, those who are victims of being mistreated in any way deserve justice, and it is totally rational for them to want quick justice and to seek out support. That's totally normal and understandable. But the government is the one that has to step in and decide who's actually telling the truth, because that's just how the system works. We have no better way of solving those type of criminal debates. And with government bureaucracy, getting justice is a process. It doesn't move as fast as we would like. But for such a complex society with, 330 million people, it's the best method that we have. And based on polling, it appears that most Americans agree with that. And they still believe in the justice process. They don't like this sort of guilty without trial type mentality that has sort of taken control in some circles on the internet. So, and of course, you don't want people losing their jobs if they are proven to be innocent of something. You don't want them losing their jobs or having their lives ruined or something, because that's not fair either, which is why we have the justice system to protect those who are making claims as well as those who are being accused of something. Or even if someone does do something that is inappropriate or said something they probably shouldn't have said at one point in time, there's no point in being this type of society that has zero ability to forgive people for mistakes, or is constantly looking for people to make mistakes so then they can crucify them for it. I mean, that type of vindictive mentality is pretty unhealthy and not really beneficial for anything in the future, since everyone's going to make mistakes at one point or another. And creating a society that is so obsessive compulsive with trying to find people's flaws is a society that most people probably don't want to be a part of. And therefore, overall, as a nation, the United States has pretty polarizing groups on each side of the political spectrum, in each political party. One which has become disturbingly authoritarian-like via this cult-like obsession with an individual whose behavior is pretty similar to dictators historically around the world. And the other side has become obsessed with focusing on the differences between people, promoting the idea that some sort of discrimination is the sole cause of every issue in the entire nation, which is obviously an oversimplified analysis, and it's not really helpful for trying to really understand how to solve the nation's problems. And in fact, in some way, it's a big distraction, because by encouraging people to focus so much on the differences in their identities, it can, in some cases, even lead people to distrust each other so much that they start separating themselves from other people just because they are of a different ethnicity or a different sexuality or whatever. And that's not healthy. We shouldn't be encouraging that. And so we have to really balance. It's fine to understand the differences between people for things, but not to the point where we're just separating each other. Additionally, to make matters worse, both sides also tend to have this disturbing off and on relationship with protecting freedom of speech, where they both on occasion want to silence criticism of their biased political ideologies for just anyone merely disagreeing with them, to the point where it has almost become like some sort of creepy loyalty test. Do you blindly accept these biased ideas as truth? Because if you don't, we will banish you for it. People who are dangerous should be getting in trouble for saying things. It's logical that if someone is making threats of violence or is openly discriminating against someone and promoting dangerous conspiracy theories which encourage physical harm, these things are against the law in many cases, and those shouldn't be tolerated in society because there's no place for that. But just criticizing a political point of view or disagreeing with someone and then you become considered an enemy for it, that is not healthy. That's super toxic. That has more in common with the life under some dictator than it does with freedom of speech. Therefore, when this craziness occurs, whether online or in company settings or in government, at news organizations, college campuses, or inside political organizations, it needs to stop. Because you cannot claim to be tolerant if you are intolerant. Disagreeing is okay. It's healthy. It's normal. You don't agree with anyone. You don't agree with your best friend on everything. You don't agree with your wife or husband on everything. You don't agree with anyone on everything. And that's okay. And I don't know why some people have decided that's not normal, but it is. And the point is that the lack of people wanting to compromise is dangerously toxic to society. It is fine to admire a politician you like, but let's not forget that all politicians are people with plenty of flaws, and they should never be worshipped as gods. And they should and have to be held accountable by their supporters for things they do wrong. Otherwise, it's just like being a mindless zombie. If a politician you support makes a mistake, and they made a mistake, you need to call them out for it. Otherwise, what are you doing? Politicians that we elect, they're like our employees. We're the boss. We choose them. But when they're not doing something right, we need to let them know so they can either correct it, and if they don't want to correct it because they get power hungry, then we fire them the next election. Additionally, when it comes to issues regarding one's identity, there is a way to recognize the effects of historic discrimination and working to fix the results of those effects today due to those terrible parts of American history without making it this religious life-like belief where it is the cause of every single problem in the world. Societies and their issues in the modern world are complex, and thus they deserve to be carefully analyzed and not oversimplified. If we truly care about fixing them and making society better, we have to remember that. Also, let's be real about what people who are truly struggling in society today actually need. Because it seems like it's become popular just for people to kind of scream and yell at each other about kind of this sort of cultural warfare, political issues that don't necessarily actually, whether you believe in them or not, make a difference. Because the person trying to feed their family, they need real solutions to their problems. The person trying to save enough money to get an education, to get a better job, they need real solutions to their problems. The person trying to not die every day in a crime-infested neighborhood needs real solutions to their problems. And the person looking for affordable healthcare and jobs that don't pay peanuts need real solution to their problems. And those are just a few of many examples. These people do not need these debates that don't actually solve anything between these hopelessly politically biased individuals on both sides of the political spectrum. What they need and what they want, and what we all want at the end of the day, is common sense and rational political discourse where people come together to make compromises which actually make society better. And luckily, the majority of Americans understand this and want this. And the majority of people around the world, even if you're living in a dictatorship, everyone just wants life to be okay. They want this basic need where they want to be safe, they want to have opportunities, and they want to be able to take care of their family. That's what people want all over the world, no matter where you live, no matter what your situation is. But depending on the politicians in charge of your country, that can be incredibly hard. So finally, in conclusion, regardless of your political beliefs or how you feel about the political debates of today, we must remember political polarization doesn't help anyone. And we must get better at critically analyzing the politicians up for election and pressuring our governments, whether in the US or anywhere else you live, to make the political systems of our nations fairer and more sophisticated. After all, these governments and these politicians, remember, they serve us. If we don't remind them of this important truth, our nations will continue to become more polarized and potentially even fall apart completely. Or if you're living in a dictatorship, you'll just have less and less freedom. So we have to be careful. After all, history reminds us, always, of just how quickly things can get really bad or worse than they currently are, if we don't have an interest in protecting what we have and trying to make it better right now. So if you enjoy this episode, please feel free to share it with friends or whoever else. Feel free to write me a message, send me an email. Always happy to get feedback, and follow on any social media pages: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast. Feel free to write a review on Apple Podcasts or even Facebook reviews, anywhere you want. The more people taking part in this podcast, discussing or commenting on social media or even messaging and emailing, that all helps. This is about just building community of people around the world that want to help make the world a better place, and that's why I think history is a really good way of helping give some perspective. And so I appreciate all of you listening. Thank you so much. It means a ton. I do notice, always greatly appreciated, no matter where you are from around the world, whenever I see, more people tuning in to check it out, it means a ton. So thank you again. And as always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.